Now, just like we can declare a constant integer, we can also declare a constant object. So let's declare a constant rectangle. Now, when we declare an object as a constant, the compiler makes all the attributes of that object constant as well. To demonstrate this, let's go back to our header file. I'm going to temporarily make these attributes public. Now, let's see what happens if we try to set the width of this rectangle to some value. We get a compilation error saying, cannot assign to variable rectangle with const qualified type. So when we make an object constant, all its attributes become constant or read-only as well. In programming, we say this object becomes immutable. So earlier I told you that to mutate something means to change it. So mutable means changeable and immutable means unchangeable. Okay? Now let's go back and make these attributes private again. So we cannot set any of the attributes of this rectangle. And that means we should not be able to call any methods that set those attributes as well, right? So we should not be able to call any of our setters. But let's look at the members of this rectangle object that we can access right now. So look, we only have getHeight and getObjectsCount. Obviously, we don't see any of our setters, but we have a few other methods that are missing here. We have the draw method, we have getWidth, and getArea. Where are those methods? Well, look at the declaration of the getHeight method. This method is declared as a constant. That means in this method, we are not changing the state of this object. So let's look at the definition of this method. So earlier, we had CLion generate this getter for us, and that is why CLion added the constant keyword here. When we add the constant keyword at the end of a function declaration, we are telling the compiler that in this function, we are not going to change the state of this object. So if we try to set any of the attributes, like the width, to some value, we get a compilation error. Okay? So we are telling the compiler that this function doesn't change the state of a rectangle object, and that is why we can access it over here. The compiler knows it's absolutely safe to call this function on a constant rectangle. Now, the reason we don't see the other functions like draw or getArea here is because those functions are not declared as constant. So the compiler thinks we might be changing the state of a rectangle object in those functions, and that's why it doesn't allow us to call them here. So, as a best practice, if we have methods that don't change the state of an object, we should declare them using the constant keyword. So let's do that real quick. So in our header file, here's the draw function. The draw function doesn't change the state of a rectangle. It only prints it on the terminal. So we need to declare it as a constant function. Similarly, we have getArea and getWidth. Now, we have a bunch of functions. Some of them are constant. This one is not. It would be nicer to group all of this together. This just makes our code a little bit better organized. So I'm going to move getHeight up here. And we can also add a line break to separate these functions from the others. I also like to separate the constructors and destructor from the other functions. All right, now that we have added the constant keyword in our function declarations, we should also add them in our function definitions. So in our CPP file, let's remove this line because we cannot change the state of our object in a constant function. Now, let's apply the constant keyword here. And one more time. And last time. Okay, so back to our main function. Now, if we access the members, we can see all the constant functions or methods. Now, what about getObjectsCount? This function is not declared as a constant, but why can we see it here? Well, this is a static function, so it's not tied to a particular rectangle object. It's tied to a rectangle class. So even though we can call it here, this is not the right way to call this method. So we should call it using the rectangle class.